Hi there, Elevated Planet community. This is John Drew here, and today I am with the wonderful Ruah Bull. How are you, Ruah?
I am wonderful today, as always, and I'm with wonderful John Drew.
Where this really took me is like the poem really just rekindled the fact and re-emphasized the fact that all these things we used to know, and that many of the indigenous folks around the world who haven't lost their way still have this ability. They can hear the music of the spheres. And I just love this. So I will just very quickly read it. So bear with me. Here we go.
The Silence of the Stars, poem by David Wagoner. When Lawrence Vanderpost one night in the Kalahari Desert told the Bushmen he couldn't hear the stars singing, they didn't believe him. They looked at him half smiling. They examined his face to see whether he was joking or deceiving them. Then two of those small men who plant nothing, who have almost nothing to hunt, who live on almost nothing, and with no one but themselves, led him away from the crackling, thorn scrub fire and stood with him under the night and listened. One of them whispered, "Do you not hear them now?" And Vanderpost listened, not wanting to disbelieve, but had to answer no. They walked him slowly, like a sick man, to the small, dim circle of firelight and told him they were terribly sorry. And he felt even sorrier for himself and blamed his ancestors for their strange loss of hearing, which was his loss now. On some clear night, when nearby houses have turned off their visions, when the traffic dwindles, when through streets are between sirens and the jets overhead are between crossings, when the wind is hanging fire in the fir trees, and the long-eared owl in the neighboring grove between calls is regarding his own darkness, I look at the stars again as I first did to school myself in the names of constellations and remember my first sense of their terrible distance. I can still hear what I thought at the edge of silence were the inside jokes of my heartbeat, my arterial traffic, the sea above high sea of my inner ear, myself tunelessly humming. But now I know what they are. My fair share of the music of the spheres and clusters of ripening stars, of the songs from the throats of the old gods still tending ever tone deaf creatures through their exiles in the desert.
So yeah, I do love that. And it just re-emphasizes the fact that everything has consciousness.
What moves me too about that poem is how he felt sorry himself, Lawrence Vanderpost, and realized that he had been and blamed his ancestors. And it's interesting to study the different levels of loss because, of course, it started quite a while ago. But a lot of people have written about the Enlightenment. And that as wonderful as the Enlightenment was, it was one of the things that actually helped us, get away from some of the theologies that had just become so encrusted and damaging, limiting. But the Enlightenment basically said that the only thing existed was what was perceived by the left brain. And so all of these things got put into the shadow. And that people who had these experiences were crazy. I remember, oh God, a million years ago, back in the 70s, reading a book by Doris Lessing called The Four-Gated City.
Okay.
And what I remember from it was how many people in mental institutions were actually folks who were doing things like seeing auras.
Yeah.
And when I was in graduate school, I actually worked as an on-call mental health worker in two different psych hospitals, one very upper class private one and one a community, the floor of a community hospital. And I got in such trouble because when you come in as a fill-in worker, you'd sit with people and interview them and give them like a 20-minute little support counseling session. So I'm sitting with this young man who is pretty flagrantly psychotic, and I'm talking to him. And he's explaining to me that the reason why he's mentally ill in this lifetime is because he was in Atlantis and he was one of the people who caused enormous damage with the misuse of his mind
Right.
and his powers. So I'm talking to him about this, tell me more about it and what was that like for you and with an intention for healing. It's like, well, you've done a lot of suffering, so certainly it was like to see if we could help shift. I made the mistake of putting this in my notes, and I got
Ah,
called in and ripped up one side and down the other because I was colluding with his psychosis. Well, maybe, but maybe that was the truth.
yeah,
And so, whether it was an important story to him that we could work with, or because it certainly made sense to me that he had this deep experience of having this brilliant mind that he had misused. And if we believe in karma and we believe in other lives, but it was one of those things where I saw what Doris Lesson was right about is that this man might very well have been in a kind of spiritual crisis or spiritual experience. And he was like sent to a hospital and medicated.
for sure. I mean,
So
yeah.
the
Sorry.
fact that they couldn't even consider that maybe there was something there, it was totally outside of their imagining.
Yeah. And that still goes on a lot today as well. People get dismissed out of hand. I mean, if there are certain people who've gone through near-death experiences and they'll come back and vividly recount things that they witnessed, and they know it to be true. They know, and in fact, their fear of death is zero now,
Mhm,
right? They're looking
mhm,
forward to
mhm,
cashing in their return ticket at some point,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
So,
mhm. Yeah,
but that point there about Atlantis, again, my dear Dolores, dear departed Dolores, who did the QHHT, quantum healing hypnosis technique, she spoke to a number of people who went back to those times of Atlantis, including those who were responsible for tapping into the energies of the planet, which they were not supposed to tap into, along with some creation kind of anomalies as well that they were messing around with. And the reason the cataclysm had to happen was to kind of, to equalize things and to move it back into balance. And what is being described there by your then patient would fit entirely. Now, what's also interesting is that, past life memories don't normally happen. Actually, I mean, you can go through a QHHT session and it can come back to you. But because of the veil of forgetfulness, which thankfully falls down, because you can imagine if you've been on this planet 500 times before and you had 500 life stories that were just crowding you out, this is the one that matters, right?
yes,
But past life regression can be enormously healing because, and again, I know you got a very specific example of this, and maybe we'll touch on that. But it can be very healing to let go of ancestral wounds that no longer
right,
apply in this
right,
lifetime.
right.
But this is interesting because another person that you put me onto recently, well, in fact, it was just again, I'm gonna get a little bit ahead of myself, but Barbara Handclough.
Mm,
Okay.
mm,
Now, interestingly, you dropped an email to me last,
mm,
which you mentioned her name.
mhm.
Now, I didn't get around to reading that email straight away because I was a bunch of stuff going on at the time, editing and newsletters and things. So I didn't. But the night before, my partner she'd gone into YouTube and she'd pick, oh, this looks interesting. It's an interview, and it was Emilio Ortiz interviewing Barbara Handclough. So I actually watched that with my partner. We watched that together. It was like about probably an hour and a half long. And I thought, wow, this is brilliant. And by the time it finished, I'd ordered her book, right? And I'm reading it now. And it's fascinating. So then the next morning, I read your email, which tells me about Barbara Handclough. Now, I love it when these things happen because this is the synchronicities at work, right?
Right.
if I hadn't read your email by that stage, because I'd have read your email and I'd have ordered the book. But just to double down on it, they've got Emma to get that up on the YouTube screen. And there's been a number of times she's put stuff on that, oh yeah, now this is supposed to be. I've got to get this one. So I love that. Um, but yeah, Barbara Handclough. And again, there's so many things. There's so many things. But I'm going around in circles now. Dolores, let's just focus on that because there was another thing I just wanted to mention very briefly before we come back to this. But Dolores, what she also used to find, you mentioned about Nefertiti and the fact that you got all these different people who claim to have been a Nefertiti kind of thing. When people come from off planet, you got to what you got to appreciate is that we are a hybrid species. The human vehicle is a hybrid species, I believe, of 20 odd different examples of DNA, if you want to call it that. We're all hybridized and we're all part Pleiadian, we're part Arcturian, we're part this, we're part that, and we all have this blend. So this is the idea, right? Is that we were created and we're all divine sparks of consciousness, but the
Mm,
consciousness actually is what fires up the vehicle for this particular lifetime.
mm,
We all have these roots. Now, the what Dolores found through her QHHT sessions is that you used to get people coming on planet, and there was and she's got one book which is it's the volunteers book, three waves of volunteers. That's right. The early ones were the ones that found it most difficult because these were people coming to planet for the first time. And what used to happen is that a lot of them would end up committing suicide because the place is so dense that the lives that they'd lived before, even though the veil of forgetfulness had dropped, they still couldn't cope with the density on the planet. Now, if you've been here 500 times before, you're kind of used to it and you cope with it. But at the same time, the first wave of volunteers struggled the most. The second
mm.
wave, because those who coordinate and orchestrate this grand organized design realize, okay, well, we need to help people. And what they would do is they would imprint memories of past lives that would enable them to come to Earth as if they'd been here before. Now, some of these were kind of the archetypal type of names, right? So that they would have lived through those experiences, but it wasn't actually them, but it was imprinted. So that was what Dolores discovered. Now, again, hand on heart, do I believe that to be true? Yes, I do. Do I ask anybody else to believe me? No. I think that you have to, again, practice discernment and work it out for yourself.
But
So,
that's fascinating, John, because there's a fourth way. I mean, so here is this wonderful woman, and she said there are these three way. Well, actually, here's another way where we look at this, and that one for you, it's like I know this. Yeah,
mm,
wow.
yeah,
I hadn't heard that understanding, but that would make sense then from within this particular way of looking at it. Why, for example, so many women I know have a memory of having gone through the burning times.
right.
And when I study history, uh, it looks like about 20 to 40,000 women were actually murdered. But the experience of a lot of women who connect with this is that there were millions.
Mm,
And but historically, there's no evidence of that. So there's a part of me thinking, well, okay, but these people are genuinely, but that makes sense that a lot of us who have come in, by the way, I think men as well as women, to help reestablish the resonance of the divine feminine and partnership with the divine masculine, we would be carrying memory, perhaps planted, but planted in an important way because of what we're meant to do,
mm,
of what it was to be destroyed.
yes,
You know,
yes.
wow, very interesting.
It kind of sits within the genetic coding, doesn't it? I think that's
Yeah.
that's the thing. And to your point, I totally agree that I mean we can look at it from a masculine perspective, you can kind of look at the mess that we're in right now, and it has to reach this pinnacle because we have to know there's a better way. And that better way for this next part of the era, the divine feminine, the collaborative energy, that is so important, and that is going to be able to drive us forward. But it has to be in balance. It has to be in harmony with the masculine because that's how things really get done.
That's right.
The domination of the masculine energy of the last centuries has been hugely damaging. But again, it's just reaching that pinnacle so that the divine feminine is stepping forward. And, everybody has a balance of masculine and feminine energy
Right.
anyway, right?
Right.
But yeah, I find that really, really interesting. That was the point I was going to make actually about your patient that was the time of Atlantis. This veil of forgetfulness drops upon birth, which is part of the life challenge here on the planet.
Mm.
But it doesn't happen that way for absolutely everybody, right? Certain people do remember things. I know examples. And in fact, it's interesting because, in fact, that was a very interesting one. It's going back probably about maybe 40 years ago. And they showed this on TV because it was so bizarre. And there was a little girl who claimed that she had children in Ireland, as it happened. She was English. And she was so insistent and she was so upset. She needed to get to her family, right? And she was able to pinpoint so many different things.
Mm.
And she was always upset because she'd left her children behind. They eventually tracked down the family. And they worked out that the time that the little girl was remembering was the time when the mom died, leaving about 5 kids, right? They actually got them all together and they agreed that this was an incarnation of their mom. And she couldn't have known the things that she'd known, the details, right?
Yeah. And that's what, because when I first started hearing about past life regression, I thought, well, and even though I had an experience, I think I was probably more understanding it initially in terms of like the archetypes kind of thing. But there are all these stories. I mean, we have one here in the States of a little boy somewhere in the Southwest who was insisting that he had been on a bomber in World War II and had died as part of, and he knew the names of the guys who were still
Yes.
alive. And
Yeah.
his family, remember this one? His
I
family
do
believed
remember it.
him,
I
and
think
they were up in,
was it over the Japanese or in the Pacific Islands or something
yeah,
like that?
yeah,
It was an American. He was an American.
American,
Yeah, and it
and
was
and and so and the guys who had been on the bomber with the one who died were still alive. So the family, God bless them, instead of like telling him he was crazy or putting him on meds, uh, found found these men who were willing. I mean, you can imagine these like old World War II vets thinking like, okay, here
yeah,
we go. But they were so dear. They met with him. This kid knew their names, knew their stories, knew what had happened, and apparently these men were just like beyond blown away
yeah, yeah, yeah,
because they were sitting with, I mean, those men got really tight. So you hear stories like this, and it's like, come on, folks. It's like different ways of looking at it, maybe, but there is something going on. And when you said that the piece about things have to come to a head, and I'll just mention this because it might be something you want to look at. One of the stories that I'm really finding deeply attuning for me personally is the astrological one,
mm,
from Pluto and Capricorn to Aquarius. And there's this young woman, I don't remember her name, who does something called lawless astrology. And she just did one on Pluto and Aquarius through the ages. And she started with Nero. Nero, Charlemagne, the split between the Orthodox and the Roman Church, Henry VIII, who had a lot in common with Donald Trump, the Protestant Reformation, the French and English, French and American revolutions. And she said, what happens is Pluto and Capricorn brings up that which has become distorted in the way that power that absolute power distorts.
Yes.
So, Charlemagne brings in Christianity for all sorts of reasons, some of them cuckoo off, but paganism had really kind of gone off the rail with human sacrifice and all kinds of stuff. So at that point in time, Christianity was restorative. Well, the Protestant Reformation has to come in because by that time, the Catholic Church had gotten corrupted with power and needed to be pulled off that pedestal.
Yeah.
You know, the last one was democracies coming in because the monarchy had just created such a mess. Um, and now people are saying that the corporations are really being challenged. And we, of course, started with that awful thing with that young guy murdering the
Yeah.
CEO. But what's coming out as a result of it is people really talking about what's happened in the medical field and how damaging it's become. So I think it's the same way with the masculine. I think the masculine probably initially came forward as a helpful counterbalancing, um, but then it's started taking over and diminishing the feminine. So from partnership, now it's gotten corrupted. But again, this isn't about replacing the masculine with the feminine. It's about bringing them into right relationship.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going through,
Absolutely.
apparently with a lot of help from a lot of different places.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do love that, and I'm absolutely convinced this is going to be successful. That
Yeah.
we're going into a time where, yeah, it may turn even more chaotic. That things are going to happen around us that you wouldn't choose to happen, but they're all happening for a reason, which is why we need the eagle's perch, right? Which is why we need to be able to be discerning, to watch, and to stay in the heart. And that's the thing. That point that you made earlier, the path of love, right? Dropping into the heart and all this. This is so important. And yet we've been outside of that for 13,000 years because that used to be the normal way of things for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. We were dropped out of it by, and according to Barbara Handclough, we were dropped out of it by the cataclysm that put everybody into that deep fear.
Right,
And it's
right. That is so interesting that
yeah,
we are a traumatized species. And
multi-traumatized.
when I was thinking about that, gosh, you think about like, the meteor that killed
Yeah.
off the dinosaurs, volcanoes, that every tradition has the Great Flood.
Hmm.
So there's obviously been one, if not more, of horrific experiences that people have been through. And we know a lot about trauma. I mean, when I was a therapist, we didn't have a lot of information about it, but boy, now there's so many modalities that do about trauma-informed care, including how trauma. I mean, when I was working with people, we had talk therapy.
Hmm.
Well, sometimes that just made it worse because you're telling the same damn story over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And if you don't listen to it in a particular kind of way, it just deepens it. But now we know how to listen. We have energy practices. We have guided visualizations like Jolie does. We have somatic work that looks at how the trauma literally gets into the physiology of the brain, the physiology of the body. So when I heard her say that, I thought, well, no wonder now there's all of this coming forward of these practices of trauma informed care, some of them absolutely coming from the alternative. I always love, we call them alternative medicines because they of course were the original medicines.
Mm.
So yeah, this is a time of deep healing, and I'm with you. I have been given the gift of hope. And I always sit back and and I know we're going to end. Martin Luther King, the arc of history bends slowly, but it bends towards justice. It's like I really invite people that one way of discerning is if something allows you to stay on that perch, which is connected to a tree, which is connected to the earth, And we all know that trees radiate this amazing love. I have one in my backyard that is like absolute protector energy. He's pretty fierce, but he's just got this fierce heart. I just love him. It's like if we can do that, and if a story supports us in this knowing that we're going to go through tough times, and there's going to be suffering, and we're all going to need to sort through how do we bear witness to that and not shut down the heart in the presence of pain. And we are being moved towards a world of unspeakable beauty. Amen.
We are. I think this is going to be, for many people, it's going to be not so much a cataclysm, Atlantis style. This is going to be an emotional cataclysm.
That's right.
Because you're taking people out of what they have been taught to believe for their entire lifetimes and actually presenting them with something completely different. But the one thing to remember above all is that this takes us to that world of unspeakable beauty. Yes. Therefore, it is worth the journey. And that's keep right. Your mind open, try to make that move down to the heart, because that's your savior. That is where we're going to be living life, and it's going to be beautiful. But Ruah, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome, my dear. This was lovely. Thank you as always.
I could keep going for hours, and I've got so many things that I really wanted to talk.
Well, these conversations will happen as they're meant to happen. And I just enjoy, when I'm kind of sitting and thinking about you, and then the next thing I want to write about pops up. So you've apparently these conversations have become a part of my inner world. Thank you very much.
I think we were obviously a catalyst for each other here. So
we are. It's a joy.
That's a divine joining together. So thank you again, Ruah. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, dear. All right.
And thank you to our community. And
yes, to our community. And remember, please, people, if there's anything you want us to be talking about, let us know. Because, and again, if it's something we don't know about, we'll find something to bring it in. But this isn't just you and me. This is all of us.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it
all
is.
Right.
And we promise that I won't be making it up. Like if I get
Good.
I know I said that, but I was joking.
I know. I know. It's you always have to be careful. All right, dear one. Take care.
Take care.
Have a good week.
Bye.
Bye, love.
Bye.